Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. Let's start in Beijing again, because the leadership situation inside China's military is still settling and the dust hasn't cleared yet. We talked previously about Xi Jinping removing two of the most senior officers in the People's Liberation Army, and what's becoming clearer now is just how stark the aftermath looks. General Zhang Youxia and General Zhenli aren't just sidelined figures. They were effectively the operational and institutional backbone of the Central Military Commission. With them gone, the commission is functionally hollowed out, leaving Xi and the senior political commissar as the only figures clearly in place. What's new here isn't the anti-corruption language. We've heard that song for more than a decade, but how explicitly state media has leaned into the idea of legal violations and challenges to the chairmanship system. That's Xi's personal control mechanism over the armed forces. When official outlets emphasize that officers undermined it, that's not subtle. It's a warning shot to everyone still wearing stars on their shoulders. Loyalty isn't just expected, it's being enforced as a survival skill. And this wave hits differently because many of the officers caught up in it were promoted during Xi's own tenure. That suggests this isn't about cleaning up someone else's mess, it's about tightening the system itself. Now, layer that over the Taiwan situation, which is where these internal moves start to matter externally. This is partly an update on what we were tracking before. President Lai Ching-te is still pushing hard for Taiwan's legislature to approve an additional $40 billion in defense spending, and the resistance hasn't gone away. What has shifted is the tone. Lai has been more direct in warning that prolonged delays don't just slow procurement, they shape perceptions. In plain terms, allies are watching to see whether Taiwan is matching its rhetoric with resources. The U.S. side has been unusually vocal. Senator Roger Wicker reiterated concerns about stalled funding, and Senator Dan Sullivan openly criticized Taiwan's opposition at the same time Kuomintang officials were visiting Beijing. No grand announcements came out of those meetings, but Beijing didn't need them to. The optics alone do some of the work. China's messaging stayed consistent, opposing independence, calling for stability, emphasizing shared heritage, while military pressure around the island continues as background noise. Flights and drills are no longer events, they're the baseline. Taipei, meanwhile, is trying to anchor itself more firmly to Washington. Lai has again emphasized cooperation with the U.S. on AI, drones, critical minerals, and supply chains designed to bypass China. This follows arms sales approved late last year and a January tariff arrangement tied to semiconductor investment. The through line is clear. Taiwan is signaling alignment with democratic partners, even as its own domestic politics complicate execution. Zooming out beyond the strait, China's economic posture has gotten sharper. The warning issued to Panama this week over the cancellation of C.K. Hutchison's port contracts is a good example. Beijing didn't hedge. It said there would be heavy political and economic costs for the decision, which voided long-standing arrangements at both entrances to the Panama Canal. The ruling jeopardizes a massive sale of global port assets and was quietly welcomed in Washington. When Denmark's Maersk floated stepping in to manage the terminals temporarily, it added insult to injury from Beijing's perspective. This is China drawing a line around strategic infrastructure and signaling that legal rulings don't insulate partners from retaliation. Europe is feeling related pressure. The European Union's investigation into wind turbine manufacturer Goldwind has drawn predictable accusations of protectionism from Beijing. What's notable is the framing. Chinese officials are increasingly portraying regulatory scrutiny as discrimination, even when it's tied to formal rules like the foreign subsidies regulation. This isn't just about wind turbines. It's about pushing back against a broader shift where economic access is now conditional on security trust. That same logic shows up in technology controls. NVIDIA's H200 AI chips remain stuck in review limbo, even after export approvals earlier this year. The delay isn't about paperwork, it's about conditions. With state pushing for tighter restrictions, Chinese buyers are waiting on the sidelines. Beijing approved an initial batch of imports last month, but the uncertainty itself is the signal. Advanced computing hardware has become leverage, not just a commercial product. Cyber issues are also creeping higher up the agenda. In Washington, Senator Maria Cantwell has accused major telecom firms of blocking the release of security assessments tied to the Salt Typhoon hacking campaign. Public comments from federal officials suggest this operation affected hundreds of organizations globally and enabled extensive surveillance through compromised networks. The allegation that senior U.S. communications were intercepted is what's driving congressional anger. China denies responsibility, but the political momentum here is toward more scrutiny, not less. Inside China, the response to pressure remains consistent: tighten control. The detention of journalists Liu Hu and Wu Yingjiao after they published a corruption investigation is part of that pattern. Authorities say they're being investigated for false accusations and illegal business operations, and the report disappeared from social media almost immediately. This isn't a new tactic, but it's a reminder that investigative reporting, especially when it touches local party officials, remains a red line. Beijing is also moving ahead with legal changes aimed at cybercrime, including proposed exit bans that would apply even after prison sentences are served. The scope of the draft law is broad, extending liability to companies that provide technical or financial support tied to online crimes. The language around misinformation and public order is elastic, which gives authorities wide discretion. Airspace control has become another visible concern. This week, Chinese police publicized a series of cases involving illegal drone flights near airports and military facilities. In some instances, individuals paid third parties to bypass altitude limits, flew into civil aviation routes, or live-streamed footage over restricted zones. One case involved imagery from inside a military airfield and resulted in detention for allegedly leaking state secrets. Authorities have now launched a nationwide campaign focused on low-altitude airspace, underscoring concerns about both safety and security. On the military side, there's growing openness in Chinese commentary about shifting priorities. Recent discussion around the YJ-18C cruise missile highlights an emphasis on targeting logistics and sustainment rather than headline platforms like aircraft carriers. The missile is framed as relatively cheap, stealthy, long-range, and suitable for mass production. Analysts are also talking about containerized launch systems, potentially deployed from merchant vessels, which would blur civilian and military lines and complicate early warning. The concept is less about dramatic battles and more about quietly pulling threads until systems fail. Finally, there's the commercial angle, which often gets overlooked but matters strategically. At the Singapore Air Show, China's state-owned aircraft manufacturer Comac continued pitching its C919 and C909 jets to Southeast Asian carriers, frustrated by delivery delays from Boeing and Airbus. Comac has already placed aircraft with airlines in Laos, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and new orders are coming in from smaller regional players. Certification hurdles remain, especially in Europe, but the intent is clear. China wants to compete across the full spectrum, from missiles to markets. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.